I need to write this down before I convince myself it didn't happen. It's been 3 weeks since my stay at that remote Airbnb, and I still wake up in cold sweats, checking the locks on my doors and windows. I'm a writer, and I had a deadline approaching for my second novel. My first book had moderate success, enough that I have a small but dedicated following online. I decided to book a secluded cabin in the mountains to finish my manuscript without distractions. Just me, my laptop, and 2 weeks of solitude. Perfect for focusing, or so I thought. The place looked charming in the photos. Rustic wooden exterior, modern amenities inside, surrounded by pine trees with the nearest neighbor a mile away. The host, Margaret, seemed friendly in our messages, and the reviews were all positive. Peaceful, serene, the perfect getaway. When I arrived, the cabin was exactly as pictured. Margaret had left the key under a flower pot as promised, along with a welcome note and a bottle of local wine. I settled in quickly, setting up my workspace by the large picture window overlooking the forest. Cell service was spotty at best, but the Wi-Fi worked well enough for research. The isolation was exactly what I needed. The first 3 days were incredibly productive. I wrote from sunrise to sunset, breaking only for meals and short walks along the nearby hiking trail. On the 4th day, I noticed something odd. When I returned from my afternoon walk, the desk chair wasn't pushed in like I'd left it. I brushed it off. Maybe I'd forgotten. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like footsteps on the front porch. The wooden boards creaked rhythmically as if someone was pacing back and forth. I froze in bed, listening intently. After about 10 minutes, the creaking stopped. I convinced myself it was just an animal, probably a raccoon or deer. The next morning, I found a small package on the porch. A paperback copy of my first novel with a note that read, "Can't wait to read what you're working on next." No signature. I assumed Margaret had left it. Maybe she recognized my name when I booked. Still, something felt off about it. I messaged Margaret thanking her for the gift. Her response chilled me. "What gift? I haven't been by the cabin since you checked in." I double-checked all the locks that night before going to bed. Around midnight, my laptop dinged with an email notification. It was from an account I didn't recognize, with just my manuscript title as the subject line. The body contained a single sentence. Chapter 15 needs work. I nearly threw up. Chapter 15 was what I had been working on that day. As someone had been reading my work, someone had been in the cabin. I packed my essentials immediately, planning to leave at first light. I wasn't going to attempt driving those mountain roads in the dark. I pushed a chair against my bedroom door and kept a knife from the kitchen on the nightstand. Sleep was impossible. Around 2 a.m., I heard the front door handle jiggling. Then came soft tapping on the windows, moving from one to the next around the cabin. I called 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No service. The Wi-Fi was down too. The tapping stopped suddenly. Then came a ping from my laptop. Somehow it had connected to a network called Just Us. A message popped up in my email. "I've been following your career since your first short story was published online. We're the same, you and I, creative souls. I knew if I could just get close to you, you'd understand. Look outside." Against every instinct, I peered through the blinds. In the moonlight, I could make out a figure standing at the edge of the trees. They were holding something up. Printed photo. Even from that distance, I recognized it. It was me at my desk, writing, taken through the picture window. I nearly collapsed from fear. This person had been watching me for days. Had they been in the cabin while I slept, read my work while I was out walking? How long had they been following me? I barricaded myself in the bathroom with my phone, my laptop, and the knife. I kept trying emergency calls until, miraculously, one went through around 4 a.m. The police arrived an hour later, but they found no one. Just footprints in the soft earth around the cabin and a stack of printed photos on the porch. All of me, some from the cabin, others from book events months ago, even one from outside my actual apartment back home. The police escorted me off the mountain. They took a report, but warned me that without security cameras or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. Margaret was horrified when she heard what happened and refunded my stay. I'm back home now, staying with a friend. I changed all my online accounts, and I'm working with a private investigator. The police are monitoring my apartment. But every time I sit down to write, I feel watched. My deadline passed. My agent is worried. And yesterday I received an email from an account I don't recognize. "Your new place has nice big windows too. Can't wait to read the ending." I haven't opened my curtains since. This happened 3 months ago when my parents left for their anniversary trip to Hawaii. I'm 19 and in my first year of college, but I still live at home to save money. The first few days were perfect. I ordered takeout, watched horror movies until 3 a.m., and didn't have to clean up after myself. The freedom was intoxicating, but on the fourth night, something changed. I was up late studying when I heard a soft scratching sound coming from inside the wall next to my desk. At first, I thought it was mice. We'd had problems with them before in this old house. I made a mental note to tell my parents when they got back and tried to ignore it. But the next night, the scratching was louder, more deliberate. It didn't sound like mice anymore. It sounded like fingernails. I pressed my ear against the wall and the scratching immediately stopped. Then, just as I pulled away, I heard what sounded like shallow breathing. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Old houses make weird noises. That's what I kept telling myself. On the sixth night, I was awakened at 2 to 17 a.m. by the sound of footsteps. Not from outside, not from another room, but from inside the wall beside my bed. Slow, careful steps as if someone was trying not to be heard. I froze, barely breathing as the footsteps moved along the wall, past my bed and toward the corner where my wall met the hallway. The next morning, I inspected every inch of that wall, looking for any sign of entry. A loose panel, a hidden door, anything. Nothing seemed out of place. I started questioning my sanity. Maybe the stress of midterms was getting to me. That evening, I invited my best friend over. I didn't tell her about the noises. I just needed someone else in the house. While we were watching a movie in the living room, she suddenly asked, "Do your parents know about the door?" "What door?" I asked. She pointed to the wall behind our entertainment center. "That looks like a door that's been painted over." I'd never noticed it before. The entertainment center had been in that spot since we moved in 7 years ago. We pushed it aside, and sure enough, there was a rectangular outline in the wall. A door that had been plastered and painted over. My heart sank. After my friend left, I couldn't stop thinking about that door. I convinced myself to check the basement for any other hidden entrances. Our basement was unfinished, just concrete floors, exposed pipes, and bare walls. As I shined my flashlight along the far wall, I noticed something odd about the old wooden shelving unit where my dad kept his tools. It seemed to stick out slightly from the wall on one side. I pulled it away from the wall and discovered a small opening, maybe 2 feet wide, leading into a narrow passageway between walls. My blood ran cold. This wasn't part of our house plan. This wasn't supposed to be here. I called the police immediately. They arrived within minutes and searched the house thoroughly. When they shined lights into that passage, they found evidence someone had been living there. A makeshift bed, food wrappers, and a few personal items. But no person. The officer told me they'd found similar cases before. Sometimes homeless people or drug addicts find ways into houses through unknown access points and live there undetected, coming out only when the residents are asleep or away. The police set up a stakeout that night. At 3:24 a.m., they caught him, a gaunt, wild-eyed man in his 40s trying to re-enter through a loose section of foundation in our backyard. He'd been living in my walls for at least 6 months, according to his own confession. The most disturbing part? The police found dozens of photos on a cheap disposable camera in his belongings. Photos of me sleeping, studying, eating, even showering, all taken through small holes he drilled in my walls. Holes I'd never noticed because they were behind posters, furniture, or in shadow cast corners. My parents cut their trip short and came home immediately. "We're selling the house now. I can't sleep here anymore knowing he watched me for months. Knowing he could have come out of those walls any night while I slept. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear scratching in the walls. My therapist says it's just trauma, that I'm safe now, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. Because if it happened once, it could happen again. Check your walls. Check your attic. Check your basement. You never know who might be listening." I've always been a rational person. I work in IT, deal with logical systems all day, and have never been one to believe in the supernatural. But after what happened in that house, I don't know what to believe anymore. I'd been saving for 5 years to buy my first home. The market was brutal, but I finally found a place I could afford. A modest 2-bedroom ranch-style house on the outskirts of town. It needed some work, but the structure was sound and the price was right. The real estate agent mentioned the previous owners had moved out rather suddenly after only 8 months, but I didn't think much of it. Job relocations happen all the time. The first day was exhausting but exciting. I moved my essential furniture in, set up my bed, and ordered pizza to celebrate. Everything felt perfect as I sat on my living room floor, eating straight from the box and planning all the improvements I'd make. This was my house, the start of a new chapter. That night, I fell asleep quickly, worn out from moving. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of running water. Still half asleep, I figured I'd left a faucet dripping. I dragged myself out of bed and checked both bathrooms and the kitchen sink. Everything was dry, completely off. As I stood in the kitchen, puzzled, the sound stopped. I shrugged it off as pipes settling in an old house and went back to bed. The second day, I unpacked more boxes and set up my home office. Everything was going smoothly until around 4 p.m. when I noticed something odd. The thermostat read 64 degrees Fahrenheit, though I'd set it to 72 degrees Fahrenheit that morning. I readjusted it and continued unpacking. 2 hours later, it was 64 degrees Fahrenheit again. I checked the system, but everything seemed fine. I made a mental note to call someone to look at it the next day and put on a sweater. That night was when things got truly unsettling. I woke up around midnight to the sound of footsteps overhead. Clear, deliberate steps, moving from one end of the attic to the other, back and forth. My house doesn't have an attic. At least not one that's accessible. During the home inspection, we'd noted that there was a small crawl space above the ceiling, but no entrance to it from inside the house. The footsteps continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. I barely slept after that. In the morning, I examined the ceiling carefully, but found no signs of entry, no loose panels, nothing unusual at all. The third day started normally. I had a video meeting for work, then continued organizing my new space. Around 2 p.m., I went to the kitchen for a coffee break. That's when I saw it. On the refrigerator door were 4 small handprints, like a child had pressed their hands against the surface with paint. I don't have children. No children had been in my house since I moved in. The handprints were too small to be mine, and they definitely weren't there earlier that day. I touched one cautiously. It was dry, slightly sticky, and had a faint reddish tint. I spent the next hour searching every closet, cabinet, and corner of the house, convinced someone was playing an elaborate prank. I found nothing, but the feeling of being watched intensified with each passing minute. By evening, I was on edge. I called a friend to come over, but they couldn't make it until the next day. I decided to distract myself with a movie and ordered food delivery again. When the doorbell rang, I was relieved to see the delivery driver. Human contact felt reassuring after the strangeness of the day. As I paid and thanked him, he looked past me into the house with a curious expression. "Your kid okay?" he asked casually. My blood ran cold. I don't have any kids. He frowned, pointing over my shoulder. "Then who's that?" I turned slowly. Through the doorway to the kitchen, just for a split second, I saw a small figure dart out of view. I thanked the driver quickly, shut the door, and immediately called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later and searched the house thoroughly. They found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone else had been there. The officer suggested I might be experiencing stress from the move and recommended I lock up carefully for the night. After they left, I sat in the living room, food untouched, every light in the house blazing. Around 11 p.m., the water sound started again, louder this time, like a bathtub faucet running full blast. I followed the noise to the master bathroom. The tub was dry, faucet off, but the sound was definitely coming from there. As I stood staring at the empty tub, the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. The lock clicked. The lights went out. In the darkness, I heard breathing, not my own. Something else in the tub. Something sliding against porcelain. I broke the door handle off in desperation and ran not just from the bathroom but from the house. I got in my car with nothing but my phone wallet and the clothes I was wearing. I spent the night in a hotel and called my realtor the next morning. 2 weeks later, I sold the house at a significant loss. I didn't care. The new owner seemed excited about their purchase. I almost warned them, but what would I say? Watch out for phantom children and something in the bathtub? They would think I was crazy. I'm living in an apartment now. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if the stress of buying a home triggered some kind of breakdown. But then I remember the handprints, the footsteps where no one could walk, the breathing in the dark. I've since learned that 3 families have lived in that house in the past 5 years. None stayed longer than 8 months. I made it 3 nights. I never wanted to go back to my grandfather's house. Not after he died. Not for the funeral. And definitely not to clean out his belongings. But as his only living relative, the responsibility fell to me. I hadn't spoken to him in over 15 years. since I was 13, and my parents suddenly cut off all contact with him. They never explained why, and now they're gone too, taking their secrets to the grave. The house was exactly as I remembered it, a century-old Victorian on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown gardens and twisted oak trees. It had always given me an uneasy feeling, even as a child. Walking up the creaking porch steps, key in hand, I felt that same childhood dread washing over me. Inside, the house smelled of dust and something else, something sour and organic. The executor told me Grandpa had become a recluse in his final years. Looking at the stacks of newspapers, unwashed dishes, and haphazard piles of junk, I believed it. This would take weeks to sort through. I decided to start with the basement. That's where Grandpa kept his tools and storage, and I figured I could find some boxes for sorting the upstairs mess. Flipping the light switch at the top of the basement stairs, I was surprised when the bulb actually worked. The basement was cold and damp, concrete floors stained with decades of mysterious spills. It was packed with shelves of old paint cans, garden tools, and boxes of yellowed papers. Nothing too unusual for an old man's basement, until I noticed the rug. In the corner of the basement lay an old Persian rug, its once vibrant colors now faded to muddy browns and grays. It seemed oddly out of place in the utilitarian space. More strange was how it was positioned, not flush against any wall, but deliberately centered over one particular section of the floor. I should have left it alone. I should have turned around, locked the house, and called a cleaning service. But curiosity got the better of me, the way it always does in these situations. I rolled back the rug. Underneath was a trapdoor. Not some makeshift plywood cover, but a proper door with iron hinges and a recessed metal handle. It wasn't locked. When I pulled it open, stale air rushed up to greet me, carrying a smell that made me gag. A narrow set of stone steps descended into darkness. The basement light barely illuminated the first few stairs. I used my phone's flashlight to peer down, revealing a passageway that looked much older than the house itself, crude stone walls slick with moisture. My common sense told me to close the door and walk away, but something else, something I can't explain even now, compelled me forward. One step, then another, until I was descending into that impossible space. The stairway continued down for about 15 feet before opening into a small chamber, roughly the size of a bedroom. My flashlight beam revealed walls of fitted stone without mortar, like something from medieval times. The air was thick and difficult to breathe. Along one wall stood a simple wooden table covered with strange implements, glass jars filled with cloudy liquid, antique surgical tools, and leather-bound books with no titles. But it was what occupied the center of the room that will haunt me until my dying day. A stone altar, waist-high and stained dark brown in patterns that could only be dried blood. Around it, a circle of symbols had been carved into the floor. Not pentagrams or anything I recognized from horror movies, but elaborate, twisting glyphs that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Chained to the wall behind the altar were shackles, different sizes, some large enough for adult wrists, others disturbingly small. Trembling hands, I picked up one of the books from the table and opened it. Inside, in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, were detailed notes and diagrams, dates going back decades, descriptions of procedures and subjects, photographs carefully pasted onto pages. I slammed the book shut, unable to look any more at what it contained. But my eyes had already absorbed too much. Images of people, some I vaguely recognized as locals who had moved away over the years, children who had gone missing in neighboring towns. That's when I noticed the far wall. What I had initially taken for natural stone patterns were actually small alcoves, each sealed with brick and mortar, dozens of them, each accompanied by a small metal plate with initials and dates. The most recent dated just 3 months ago, shortly before my grandfather's death. As I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, the light from my phone caught something on the floor near my feet. A small toy car, the paint worn away from being handled by small fingers. Next to it lay a child's hair clip with a butterfly design caked with dirt. The final horror came when I looked up. The ceiling of this hidden chamber was covered with names, hundreds of them, scratched into the stone. A record of victims spanning generations, some dating back to the early 1900s. And there, in the corner of the ceiling, I found my own parents' names with a date. The exact date they had abruptly cut ties with my grandfather. They had discovered this place. They had known. I backed away, stumbling up the stairs in panic. At the top, I nearly jumped out of my skin when my phone rang, the executor calling to see how the cleanup was progressing. With shaking hands, I told him I needed the police at the house immediately. The investigation is still ongoing. They've identified 47 distinct remains so far in the hidden chamber and the surrounding soil. DNA testing continues. The books and journals my grandfather kept have become evidence in what the papers are calling the worst case of serial murder in the state's history. I've learned that the house was built by my great-great-grandfather. Whatever twisted legacy began with him had continued through the generations, with my grandfather as its most recent caretaker. The question that keeps me awake at night, the question I can't bring myself to address, is why my parents didn't go to the police when they discovered the truth, why they simply walked away, and why in my grandfather's final journal, he had written my name with a question mark beside it. I wonder sometimes if there's something in my blood, some dormant inheritance that might one day awaken. I've scheduled an appointment to be sterilized next month. Whatever has lived in my family line dies with me. I still have nightmares about that room, about the names on the ceiling, about the small alcoves with their metal plates. But what terrifies me most is the final entry in my grandfather's journal, dated just days before his death.